So I'm going to share some experience from the Cocoa Fertilizer Initiative, but not without mentioning that there are several partners of that initiative in this room. So if you can wave your hand, I see Ken Giller over there, the chair of our scientific committee, Crystal and Jürgen from CGIAR. We have Cedric and Nick from Mondelez, and Howard from Mars, obviously. Maybe someone from IITA is here. eCraft is involved. So, and the fact that these partners, many of which private partners, are in this room is, I guess, a good indicator of the partnership itself, the engagement that it brings. And that would also be my central message. So the Cocoa Fertilizer Initiative is a program, a partnership between the World Cocoa Foundation on behalf of the cocoa industry, together with a number of fertilizer industries and the Ivorian government through its Conseil Café Cacao, which is its regulator for the coffee and cocoa sector, together with IDH. Why do we have this initiative? Because there are farmers out there. The average cocoa farmer in West Africa gets around 400 kg per hectare of cocoa beans, which is utterly insufficient to maintain a good quality of life for him or herself and the family. A farmer will need many inputs, many support systems to get to a level of productivity to have a better quality of life. And one of them, critically, is fertilizer. So obviously there's a whole context of good agriculture practices, planting material, where Howard can tell you everything about. But fertilizer has been identified as a critical issue. That's why we initiated this initiative. If you look at fertilizer consumption in Côte d'Ivoire, that only covers 8% of what is actually exported in the form of cocoa beans to Europe and other markets. So another way to look at cocoa farming is to call it mining. Again, that's why these 20 partners came together to do the fertilizer initiative. So what do? First of all, we try to find farmers that are so-called fertilizer ready, farmers that have good conditions on the farm where fertilizer is likely to have a good response. Fertilizer is a huge, big investment for a farmer, so it better have a good response. These farmers are poor. So what is a fertilizer ready farmer and how can we work with a fertilizer farmer? That's question number one. It was already mentioned, there's a cocoa action program. Companies are committed to work with around 300,000 farmers, and it is within those 300,000 farmers that we try to identify those who are ready for fertilizer. Another thing we do is we use the existing cocoa supply chain. We leverage that supply chain logistically to bring fertilizer to where it's needed. And this will result in fertilizer that is cheaper. And the engagement with those farmers also ensures proper guidance of the farmer how to use fertilizer. So that's what, and this is what we're after, dancing happy farmer. I hope, by the way, that this doesn't make you seasick, these prezzies. These actions, very much focused around the supply chain, is supported by a number of actions around what we call the enabling environment or the pre-competitive action level. A very important one is knowledge. And this is what brings me to the topic of today, the collaboration with research. We have three major blocks of research ongoing at this moment. One is we're following 140 farms on the ground to understand what is the response to fertilizer and which are the factors that explain fertilizer response. Because we want to understand who or what is the fertilizer-ready farm. And this brings us to very interesting, challenging observations. The science wisdom says, use fertilizer on young trees. Don't use it on old trees. What farmers do is use it on old trees to combat them from dying down. And actually, the best response we have seen so far in the test, and again, these are preliminary things, is response to fertilizer on trees that are older than 25 years of age. So between what we know, or so-called know as science, and what actually happens on a farm, there's a huge gap. And having 130 farms to monitor what's happening is a huge challenge, and the variability is enormous, and actually it will be challenging to get to real simple insights. But so this is a huge gap, science and farmers. A second project we're doing is soil mapping and foliar analysis. We're mapping the entire cocoa belt in Côte d'Ivoire. We're taking foliar samples, we're triangulating it with yield data to understand what is proper fertilizer for cocoa. And actually, the more we delve into it, the more we understand that we don't understand what a cocoa tree needs in terms of nutrition. And that's why we started a third project, which is mapping out the basic knowledge around cocoa, which is out there. This work just completed, and the conclusion is we really need some fundamental research to understand nutrition in cocoa. So, despite of decades of research and the chocolate industry being 80 billion a year in terms of chocolate market, we can see that the crop that is delivering that beautiful product is totally under-researched. So I would say, as a scientific committee, we have a long, glorious future ahead of us. And I hope many of you can chip in. Well, just to finalize my story, there are some other elements like risk sharing and monitoring of prices, which is less relevant for you. There's work on getting the same message consistently across to the farmers through harmonized training materials and approaches. But the one which is important for me is this one. And this is actually my key message, which I already emphasized earlier today. For me, for science to be relevant, we need shared governance of research. Research needs to be opened up for companies to indicate and to leverage resources to make it relevant to deliver impact on the ground. This is a complex governance of our initiative. Basically, we have a supervisory committee that represents the major stakeholders. We have a country committee that looks at the operational issues, and we have the scientific committee chaired by Ken Giller that is in charge of all the research. But the research is surfacing to the needs of the program, which doesn't mean that science becomes dependent or fully client-oriented. It is already difficult enough to make these researchers responsive to what is needed, even though we finance their research. And Ken can tell you all about that. But so my basic point is, if we want research to become relevant, we need more than the question, what does the private sector need? And I really like the matrix which was shared by Tony earlier. It's much more than contract research which is needed on specific topics. It's about engagement, it's about working together and opening up the research process for the needs of the supply chain. Thank you very much.